Okay, I think let's kick things off. So first and foremost, welcome everyone. I'm joining you here from London, as you can probably tell with the very British accent. I am joined here by two wonderful partners and guests, Courtney Powell, who is the CEO of 500 Startups, and Derek Anderson, who is the founder and CEO of Startup Grind and Bevy, and will be joining them for introductions very shortly. But what we're going to be talking about today is around how do you navigate an unpredictable economy? So even in the last 24 hours, we've seen that there's been all sorts of shifts in the markets. Obviously, crude oil prices have just suddenly gone and tanked south. We've got probably the most unprecedented times for being a founder. And it comes with having a situation where you have to make tough calls. There are going to be different ways in which we navigate the way that you're positioning your business. And this is the topic that we're going to be discussing in depth. My name is Nick Adia. I look after global operations here at Oracle for Startups. And we're a program that serves startups worldwide, enabling next generation growth, business development, and driving cloud-based innovation for our customers. But let me turn over to Courtney Powell. I would love, Courtney, for you to give us a quick introduction of yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm always excited to get to spend time and talking with founders. My name is Courtney Powell, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of 500 Startups. I started in this role actually about 10 months ago now, so still fairly new in this role, but not new to the 500 family. 500 invested in my company 8 years ago now. I went through batch 4 of 500 Startups as a founder, and so definitely can empathize a lot with what the founder experience is. And following that, I went on to be CEO of a company called Agent Pronto, which was ultimately acquired by Fidelity National Title. And then I ran corporate development for Keller Williams Realty International just before joining 500. So really looking forward to sharing my experience and getting to chat here with Derek and Nick.
Amazing. And Derek, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Derek Anderson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Startup Grind. It's a community designed to educate and connect entrepreneurs and people in startups. We have about 600 chapters around the world where about 100,000 people get together, either in person or virtually every year. We started in my office about 10 years ago, and we now have chapters in 120 countries, and hopefully you're a part of one of those chapters. If not, look for one in a local city near you. And a few years ago, we built a tool to help us scale Startup Grind's community, and that tool is called Bevy, and it now powers communities for companies like Atlassian and Salesforce, Slack, Duolingo, and others. And so spend a lot of time in the community building space. And we also acquired a company called CMX, which some people may be familiar with in terms of community building, and work with that. Great to be here.
Amazing. What great introductions. And I feel like there's a wealth of experience in this room. So I think let's start with some of the good news. I feel like we don't have enough of that at the moment. I feel like every time I turn the news on, there's always some sort of story around why things are going wrong. But I think we all know that sometimes even in the worst times possible, some great things can come out of that. And I think that we've seen the fact that there has been obviously a hit to our economy, but deals are still happening. There is a situation where the world has shifted, as is the economy, but it hasn't completely stalled in the tech sector. So in your view, who has successfully navigated this pandemic, and who has been able to turn that into a strategic advantage? Let's turn to Courtney first. What's your view on that?
Yeah, so I think one example that we've experienced with our latest batch, which was, I think, batch 26, if I believe, but we were going into demo day where our founders have a chance to pitch investors in mid-March, just as things were really starting to escalate across the world. And one of the kind of real-time innovations that 500 had to make was moving the demo day experience online. And then really building out that investor community to give the startups a chance to raise money. And so I think in terms of the good news, we have seen a number of our startups who were able to successfully use an online platform to connect with investors and continue those conversations into what we hope will be some near-term fundraising for those teams. So I think what we've seen is the founders who are open to doing things in a different, in a bit of a different way. There are investors out there who are investing in startups right now, who are investing in new companies that they've never met, not just existing relationships. We are all seeing that done virtually, and I think that's great news for the startup community. Not to say that's not more difficult, but it is happening.
It's great to hear that people are using a virtual platform. And I think, Derek, are you seeing that as well, that companies are started shifting their physical to virtual and other sort of ideas of successes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question that I ask myself a lot, is what can I learn from this experience and what positives can I pull out of it, both professionally and personally. Some professional examples of success. There's a 500 startups company called Eventus that just raised some funding to kind of shift their event. They do like mobile conference apps, and they're shifting into more of a virtual sort of community space and customer space. And that they were able to raise some funding. They're based in the Middle East, and an amazing founder. But really impressive to see that. I read a story in the New York Times, I think, or maybe it was from Los Angeles, but it's of a founder who built all the tents for like Coachella and all sorts of concerts and music festivals, and they, he was shifted from that to building the hospitals, the makeshift, the sort of temporary hospitals. He'd never done that, but they knew how to build structures, and just was so impressed by that. I know a company in the Midwest that was able to get a piece of government funding to help build supplies that hospitals need, which they obviously had no plans or availability to get. A huge grant, like millions of dollars, to do that. So, we hear it a lot, we read about it a lot, that recessions and difficult times can create some of the best companies and opportunities. And we've seen Uber and Airbnb and others come out of the last recession. And you see there's this paralyzing effect of this, and then there are those that break through that and are able to find a way to sort of make lemonade out of the lemons. And it's inspiring to see, and it's really hard to do, but how can you sort of get, if you're here, how can you just sort of bump your step up just a little bit? You don't need to be Zoom in terms of global acceptance right now, but what can you do to just kind of solve the existing problems that you have, keep the people that you have on your team working, and do it quickly.
And actually, following on from that. Oh, can we hear it echo? Oh, no, that's fine. Following on from that, I think there's a really interesting point that you made there around Zoom, and I wanted to kind of dig a bit deeper in that with you, Derek. Is that there is this kind of element that we've all put Zoom up here as kind of a startup that's really navigated successfully, and it's got obviously a hunger for convenience, and it's kind of helped people to connect in different ways. All the way from tutorials on Lemonade to various different people that are connecting in various communities, like you mentioned with Eventus. How do startups, in your view, successfully navigate? What are the steps that they should be taking to navigate themselves when a market changes?
Well, I remember when in 2012, when Groupon was really successful, everybody had started a Groupon company. And for a while, everyone was starting a ride sharing company. So I think you've got to be careful about just going wherever the wind blows. And this is something that, we're all sort of moved, anybody that's in the in-person space is sort of moved into a virtual space. And I think what I've tried to do is first of all just sort of read a lot, be patient, not make any quick decisions, or not any rush decisions. You've got to make quick decisions, but not make rush decisions about what to do. And do we have a perspective on something that we can be great at? And I think this tent example, it's not a technology example, but they found something that they could be great at, that is an immediate need that they could make money on, and they've gone for it. No one's going to be Zoom. I was looking at all of the video conference software out there. There are dozens and dozens of companies competing with Zoom. How do you think they feel right now? So it's okay to feel discouraged. It's okay to feel, it's natural to feel concerned. But are there problems that you can uniquely solve that either are new problems or are a sort of variation of the problem you were already solving, and that give you a unique perspective to do that? I have a friend that's started this Instagram channel called, it's called, gosh, I should know this. It's called Untold Stories, and it's about athletes whose seasons were cut short. And he is an athlete himself, and his season was cut short, and now he started this thing. And there are these opportunities that exist that you are the best person to solve. You gotta be honest about that, and then be thoughtful about it, and then go try to make it happen and adjust as the feedback starts to come in.
I really love that. You are the best person to solve. I feel like that's my sort of tweetable sentence so far. Courtney, do you see that with 500 as kind of a mantra that you give your startups? So how do you help the portfolio of companies successfully navigate in a current market like this?
Yeah, I think in a way, kind of what we're sensing and feeling, whether it's at 500 startups, organizational level or across the portfolio, is everybody's kind of catapulted back into MVP mode, right? I mean, we knew what we were for the last few years in this kind of bull market. And all of a sudden, we're having to reassess who we are in light of COVID and the changes. So I think, just building on what Derek had said, it's taking whatever that kernel of your original business is and seeing how that shifts slightly in order to serve the market now. I think a couple of pointers that we're giving to our portfolio right now is certainly, I think decisiveness is really critical because, as a startup, that agility is one of your inherent, benefits, right? Your advantages over larger companies or better financed companies. So being able to respond to the market need, get through that MVP process as quickly as possible, I think is really critical. The second thing that I think is maybe not discussed as much, but also really important is having flexibility in terms of your payment terms and your contracts with customers. Right now there's organizations and individuals all over the world who are reassessing their budgets and having to decide what stays and what goes. So we're encouraging folks to really proactively reach out with flexible terms, with flexible mindsets. So when they're going through that list of what stays and what goes, it's easier for them to continue to work with you. So I think that's another element that's pretty tactical. But I think tactical is really what matters right now. We don't have much time for strategy. We actually have to commit to a strategy and then start moving forward really quickly.
I think you've touched on something that really kind of is close to my heart, because I think someone who looks after operations, there's always a tendency that you have to make tough calls. And I love the fact that you talked about decisiveness, because I think this is what really truly separates founders from others, in the sense that you almost grow in times of crisis because it forces you into survival mode. And to tell us a little bit more, Courtney, about, you mentioned around flexibility. I want to dig in a bit deeper around how do you advise your startups to look at their operating expenses and looking at how they can minimize that. Obviously, flexibility is one part of it, but how do you coach them to think about some of the difficult decisions, whether it be retention of customers or whether it be looking at, for example, their staff? And it's a really challenging and emotional time. So how do you do that with your companies?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that last sentence you just said is really important. It's a challenging and emotional time. And so I think, before you even get to the operating decisions, I think there's a lot of work to be done on your own psychology during this period. So I think for founders in particular, I don't know, at least when I was a founder, it felt like every day death was imminent, to your company. And so in some sense, I think founders are kind of well prepped to respond to things like this, but making sure that you're in your best place, whether that's getting some sort of exercise or making sure you're talking to people or just taking care of your mental and emotional health, I think is really even more important than usual before you go into making operational decisions. So I think that's one element. I think the second part of it in terms of operational decisions is this is a time that you really, in my opinion, need to ruthlessly prioritize. And, I would argue that startups should always do that. But in a bull market, it's easier to be a little bit looser with your focus and with your resources. And right now, that's simply not the case. So like most companies, you would need to prioritize cash flow, cash management. So I think in order to do that, you have to know where your sources of revenue are coming from, and really any other operational decision related to other feel goods, we might not have time for at this point. So really documenting, sharing with your group what those priorities are, why those are the priorities, and then saying no to everything else. And that's hard to do, but I think very critical at this point.
I love that. I love the fact that you brought up around mental health. I feel like as a journey as founders, it can be quite a lonely place. And I think the really nice thing is that by sharing that mission with your community and the people that are around you, I think that's so important, just to kind of therapeutically kind of gets people on the same page, but makes people feel that they're part of that shared sense of purpose. I mean, kind of turning over to you, Derek, I mean, this whole idea of prioritizing, obviously keeping yourself true. As someone who's a founder, obviously, of two different businesses, I guess you come across this quite a lot. So how do you think about, from an operator perspective, how can you think more lean about how startups can consider their own operations and financial management?
There's this great quote from one of the executive directors at Who, and I'll post it in the chat here. And it's very short, but he talks about what he's seen be successful in crises like Ebola and SARS and other thing that he's been a part of over the last few decades. And it's very interesting where he talks about if somebody needs to be right and they're waiting to get the right answer, they're going to fail. And that basically speed trumps any sort of perfection. And so I think what Courtney was saying really resonated with me. I think, look, like we're now, it's funny, the first 3 weeks of this, I just thought, oh my gosh, this can't get any worse. So I'm just going to just power through it. And then after 3 weeks, I started to keep like a nightly journal because I just couldn't believe what was happening on a daily basis. And my experience, I spoke to a friend recently who's the CFO of a large company, and I said, like, everyone's experience is different. And I said to him, like, does it feel like just every day you're like a washcloth getting like wringed out at the end of the day? And he's like, no, like it's been really good. Like our business is doing great. And I thought, oh, okay. So I think, look, everyone's experience is going to be a little different. Your own, I think your teams, if there's one thing I was going to say you should try to over communicate as much as possible to your team and to your customers, as Courtney really eloquently talked about how you can help your customers at this time, and to be one of those tools that they keep. And communication, I'm getting emails from tools that I have no plans to eliminate, and who never reach out to me. I'm getting multiple emails from them asking to get on the phone. I'm really impressed by that. And whether it's you as the founder or the co-founder or a senior leader in the team, that could be even more meaningful to somebody if it's you versus someone on the team. But high level of communication, it's okay to be wrong, because I find myself sometimes writing emails at 11 or 12 at night, because I realize that by noon the next day, things could have totally changed, and I need to get a message out, and I know what that message is, and I don't want to have to rethink that entire message in 12 hours. And so I think you got to don't worry about the typos. Don't worry about the mistakes. Don't worry about the things you're going to be wrong about. Could be wrong in 2 days. You could be wrong in 2 weeks. But just communicate quickly, and as much as you possibly can. And I think people, you get a lot of credit, and you get a lot of leeway from people if you're doing that.
I think this is really important around over communication. I remember when I was running my last startup, one of a really good investor / friend of mine said to me that, Nick, one day the world will be a different place in 6 months' time, and you just have to believe it. And it was always around, he always taught me that, make sure you over communicate. You're going to be wrong, but at least you told us. And this kind of reminds me of a particular area that I think a lot of our founders would love to hear a bit about. We all have investors, we have boards, we have advisors, we have people that essentially want to help us, but it's sometimes difficult, because how do you tell someone that's invested in you or is advising you that something might be going wrong or you need help? I mean, Derek, I'm going to turn to you first, then to you, Courtney, but what's your approach? When you over communicate and you've got these people around you, how do you seek help in such a time like this?
People that know your business are going to be the greatest help to you. People that are new to your business are going to be less help to you from a business perspective. A lot of these things, you may just need general business advice, in which case, you may have a family member, or you may have a friend who, I mentioned my friend whose business is doing really well, and totally different industry, but he's a leader, and that's something that's helpful to me. So I think nobody knows your business anywhere even close to the way you do. So most of the really prescriptive advice you're going to get for your business is just they're just not gonna have all the facts. That's always true, but especially right now. And so I think the first thing you got to do is wrap your head around the entire situation that you're in. When are you going to run out of money? What big customers do you have that might drop off? What team members do you need to take care of, and support right now, because maybe a loved one's sick, or maybe they're sick, or maybe they're now cooped up in their house and they're not used to it. Whatever those things are, wrap your hands around all the possible issues, all the issues you have, and the different scenarios you have. And I think write those things out, talk to people internally that also understand those things. I get better advice from my co-founders on the current issues than anybody else, or my controller, or my accountant. These are my lawyer, who talks to a lot of other startups. Those are the most useful people to me. And then big strategy stuff, I go to the VCs or the sort of bigger advisors for that. But I think get your arms around all of your potential problems, and start to build scenarios of paths that you should take, and slowly walk down those paths. And as time moves, adjust and get advice and support, if it's outside of your pay grade or your experience. And if not, better to move fast than to wait around and get 20 people to give you their opinion. Just see what works and give it a shot. You may be right.
No, I love that. That's awesome. I love the idea of segmenting your problems in a way that allows you to channel it to the right person. I mean, Courtney, how are you doing this with 500? I mean, how are your founders, and what advice are you giving them around this topic of making these approaches and finding the right advice at the right time?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a couple of different things, maybe like back to the mindset idea a little bit differently. We had a unique experience that our, I guess, Q1 board meeting for 500 was March 15th or around that date. So literally right at the precipice of things, really starting to escalate. So we had spent, months putting together the 2020 operating plan, 2020 budget, et cetera. And then you get in that meeting and everything that you've worked for is literally just been obliterated, right? And so I think, with that experience, what I took from that is, okay, in order to actually engage with our board or with our advisors or our startups engaging with us in that way, everybody has to be like on the same mindset in terms of realizing that just the market is completely different and accepting that we're in this new world. And, for me in particular on that day, like I wasn't quite there yet. So the types of questions I was asking changed as my own acceptance of like the reality that was going on around me changed. But in particular for our portfolio, I mean, one of the vantage points that I now have coming from a founder to being more on the VC side is essentially, as Derek said, nobody will ever know your business better than you, better than your co-founders, et cetera. You can go super, super deep, right, related to, what the problem is that you're trying to solve and the customers you serve. But VCs and advisors, whether they're legal advisors or otherwise, have the benefit of being able to see a really broad swath of the industry, right? And so they're able to help you avoid too myopic of a view at this point. So, we have people who want advice on, whether it's they're doing layoffs or other changes, et cetera. Like in that moment, obviously that is such a big issue for the founder. They're really struggling with that. And being able to ask for outside help to try and understand, how other companies have gotten through this time period, how businesses do survive and companies and cultures do survive. I mean, that's been, I think is really necessary, just making sure you're asking for an outside perspective so you aren't too insular in your thinking.
I think we sometimes all forget that as founders, that sometimes that our investors and advisors are probably talking to people that have the exact same problem, and we feel that we're the only ones battling this in our own paradigm. But I think it is in just shifting the conversation slightly. The world has slightly changed. Like the idea is that I actually had to measure out the other day what was 2 meters, and was almost kind of like socially conscious that if someone gets anything close to me, push my trolley and just hit them away while I'm in the line at a superstore. And the world has kind of gone from a perspective where we were in concerts, bars, cafes, VC networking events, and we've gone to this very strange myriad of social distancing and obviously Zoom. And I guess, Derek, your startup actually focuses on building communities in real life. So I think this is almost a really interesting shift. And for someone who's had 100,000 people attend events, obviously with Startup Grind, I mean, how do you see our sense of community shifting in a world that is really sort of now embracing this idea of social distancing?
Yeah, it's I'm an in-person human being, and most human beings are, by the way. That's not unique to me. I think, if anything, the last few weeks have taught us, and there's been lots of people writing about this. Fred Wilson wrote about this. Mark Suster wrote about this. We talked to, dozens of big customers running millions of people inside their community every day. The human to human connection is not going away permanently. Zoom fatigue is real. Lack of human, I mean, we have the loneliness epidemic, which is already going on coming into this. It's obvious, like the world is getting much, much lonelier every single day than it was before this crisis. And so, I think for us, like, building your community has never been more important than it is now. And people need you more than they ever needed you before. And you can be that support system that they don't otherwise have. And so, I think we're seeing with Startup Grind specifically, in February, we did a couple of virtual events out of 200. This month, we'll do 200 virtual events. We've transitioned all of those in-person experiences in every culture, in every country. Like, everyone's moved to, to a virtual experience. We have a customer called Duolingo that helps you learn a language. This is something you could be doing during this time to pass the time if you're not already. But they have in-person events. They do hundreds and hundreds of these. They'll have 500 virtual events this month, up from basically 0 6 weeks ago. So I think great communities, as Courtney said earlier, like this, great founders, great companies, great teams, they're going to react quickly. This is your advantage over the people. And I think we're seeing that at the community level as well, even for in-person. Community is about much more than just being in person. Building community is about feeling belonging. It's about solving real business challenges like acquisition and success and others like that. And so that still needs to happen, maybe now more than ever. And we're seeing really the great communities make that shift almost overnight.
And shifting to you, Courtney, and it's kind of a similar question, but slightly related, but I love this idea of kind of the idea that there is going to be this focus on building community. And I think it's almost easier and harder. You've got access to more people, but you don't have that exact human to human interaction. But it almost presents an opportunity for people, whether they're thinking about their customers or their advisors or in those who are around the startup. How do you see that 500 is building communities virtually, and how are you advising your founders to think about sort of this idea of community building at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously community building is so important, and we've really had to ask ourselves at 500, like, what is it, that stokes a community? And I think, part of it is what Derek said, obviously, like making sure that there's some sort of shared experience or shared goal that you're working on. That's usually what's the impetus for community. But I think for us, we've really tried to focus in on two components. One is, certainly meeting people where they're at in terms of their learning needs. So our community is a portfolio of founders, right, who are trying to understand through webinars like these and others how they can survive this time period. So we're providing as much training and content and discussion related to the shared goal of survival right now. So I think that's one component. I think the second component is much more on just the human interaction, right? So really encouraging people to check in with people more often, just asking them how they're doing with, being indoors all the time, et cetera. I think we've also tried to really focus on providing more virtual events, but that are a little bit more of the routine nature. So, doing online yoga classes, or today we had a Zumba class, we're doing cooking demonstrations, just anything to make people feel like we're doing this life together. And it's not a perfect substitute, but it gives you something to break up your day and, just keep focused on the fact that we do need those types of distractions. It can't all be about, the work aspect of it. So really the combination of both, I think, is important.
I really like this idea that you kind of mentioned around there is this human to human interaction. Like you say, we need we need Zumba, we need to see people, we need to feel that we're still in a human world. Where this becomes a little bit complex, I've seen, and is when you think about your customers, like it can be easier with your employees, it can be easier with, for example, your advisors, people that know your business. But obviously customers themselves, whilst they're also other human beings that are facing their own challenges, how do you recommend in this environment, Courtney, that startups can take steps to retain their customers and minimize that churn? Because again, how do you get them feeling part and parcel of that community? And to basically make sure you don't lose them in this process?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's going on now in terms of connecting with your customers isn't necessarily different than the tactics you would take in other time periods, right? So I think it's understanding like what's driving your customer base, like what are the challenges that are keeping them up at night, and then how can you, be a part of that conversation. So I mean, just this example just popped up in my head, but I know that Silicon Valley Bank, for example, has been hosting, monthly coffee chats, or actually it's more frequently than monthly, for CFOs, for other types of individuals, who are making decisions right now in this time period, and just connecting people, just being a forum to connect you with other people who are dealing with similar challenges. And that, I wouldn't have thought about SVB doing that, right? But that's a good example of being able to be a part of the conversation of their customers, CFOs who are trying to deal with these difficult decisions right now. I think, we've seen examples of other startups. For example, I think Carbon Health has been a really great example of a business that was already focused on virtual health, telepresence, et cetera, who started to offer free resources, for their end user, which are just us everyday people who are looking for medical advice and assistance during this time. So just really trying to provide different forums, whether that's virtual, whether it's a chat bot, whether it's medical guides, et cetera, just trying to meet people with the information that they're looking for right now.
I think that's great. I love the fact that you brought out the fact that it's kind of a customer problem, and that problem will still exist whether we're in a pandemic or not. If anything, it could even be accentuated depending on obviously where the business is, and kind of giving them that forum to share, I think is great. And I mean, Derek, how do you look at this? Obviously from Bevy and Startup Grind, you're kind of at the helm, and obviously your startups are also dealing with this with customers. How do you bring them closer to their problem, the customer problem, and help them really navigate so they can retain and grow their customer base?
Yeah, I mean, it's just depending on what kind of product you are, you're probably focused on one of those two things, either retaining or maybe if you're lucky, growing what you've got. We do these sort of customer virtual events. Our product Bevy is it's an enterprise product, so we have fewer customers paying, significant amounts of money. So it's easier for me than say a consumer app where you have lots of people just paying you $10 or $15 a month. It'd be impossible to have relationships with all those people. But because we have an enterprise product, a lot of these people we know very, very well, and so at the beginning of these meetings, I've been giving out my cell phone number as sort of the first slide. And, not a lot of people take me up on it, but it's been an easy way to build trust. And I wish they would. The only message I got at the last meeting was somebody who sent me some text messages about someone on my team that they really appreciated, who was doing a great job. But at least they know that I'm reachable anytime, day or night. I'm the CEO. I'm one of the co-founders. I hope they'll take me up on that even if they're not really struggling, even if they just want to brainstorm, or they need a little extra help. Like if I'm available, if I can make time to be available, everybody should be able to make time to be available for them. And then, getting creative on terms, getting creative on, getting ahead of renewals. If someone's renewing in June, you should be, or July, you should be dialed in with them, lockstep, day and day, what's going on with them, how are you helping them today, creating 2-3x the value that you were creating before. If you're in a protect and contain mode, if you're in a growth mode, God bless you for that. Go for it. Facebook CPMs are at an all-time low, or not all-time low, but a 2-year low. This is a great time. If you're growing, this is a great time to take advantage of that and to get way ahead of everybody else. So recognize the situation you're in, recognize what the biggest problems are. If keeping revenue flat this year, that may be the best thing you can do. You may be able to do better than that, but just, don't be concerned if just containing and having a flat year where you keep as many people on your team as possible. You keep as many of the existing customers as possible. Like very few people are making money this year in business or personally or anything. And that's okay. Personally, I feel great peace with that. Like if we can keep as many jobs as possible and we can, and just maintain what we've got, like that's a huge win in some scenarios. And so, identify what that is for you and set objectives around that, and then guide the team towards, achieving those goals.
Do you know what? When you said that, I think that it kind of resonates with me around that it's really about mindset. Because one thing I really liked is the fact that you put your phone number on the first slide and you're that accessible is testament to, let's say, for example, let's say you were Zoom and or you're a competitor of Zoom, there's 12 products and you're the only one on your slide that is accessible. That's a really good signal to a customer, but it comes from a mindset perspective. It's a case that you're willing to do something differently, to position yourself in a way that is in line with the customer experience or the experience that you want to deliver. So it really can, like you say, people are not going to make money potentially this year. And it really comes down to how do you position your mind. And I think, Courtney, this goes back to what you mentioned around with mental health and really positioning that strong sense of mindset. So what do you think are the components of a founder's mindset that can help a founder thrive, especially when there's a lot of competition and the market forces are against them? What components of your mindset do you think are important in this particular environment?
I was actually just thinking about this morning and dealing with my own mindset, right? I think hopefully, if you don't already know, I think it's a good time to just assess personally what are motivating factors for you. For me, it might be going for a run or listening to podcasts or talking to founders. Those are all things that I really find motivating. And so I think knowing what the prescription is when you get down is really important, because everybody, is experiencing highs and lows, very low lows right now. And I think they're happening at a more frequent pace than what probably most people are used to. So I think asking yourself, asking your co-founders kind of to acknowledge how you can help each other through those ups and downs are really important. I think the other part of mindset is just, also knowing that though the timeline is indefinite right now, we don't know, right, when we'll be able to return back to a more normal state. I think that we have to know that it's someday, and someday balance will return, right? So knowing that this isn't going to go on forever, we don't know the exact time, but at some point we will experience some form of relief related to this is really important. It's not forever. Then I think the other point is just, you became a founder. If you are a founder, I know that you are already have some degree of risk tolerance and resilience, because to grow your business, right, to stay in a business, you've already proven that, you have the characteristics to help you get through a time period like this, where you really need to be thinking how to survive, how to be resilient, how to continue to take risks, even with this environment. Those are all good things to continue to focus on now. So that's what I would say. Really think about how you can keep your personal motivations high, helping your co-founders to do the same. Knowing that this is going to be temporary in nature, and that your resilience and what made you a founder is going to help you get through this.
That's awesome. I love that. That's actually made me think I've got to rethink my life as well in a good way. Because I think this does make you rethink, obviously, why did you go and set up your business in the first place? What was the actual problem you wanted to solve? And actually, I think reigniting the passion around that and almost I actually find that the founders that reignite the passion in their teams at this point are founders you want to back. They're people that that this is probably the hardest point you're ever going to be in your founding life. if you can get through this, you can pretty much get through anything. I mean, Derek, does that resonate with you as well? Is that kind of what you're seeing with mindset with founders and what kind of separates people in this environment?
You know, I have a team member. I have about 50 people that work on my teams, and I have a team member who has been kind of critical of some of my leadership and decisions. And you know, I've been sending these just huge updates, and you know, to the team, trying to stay on top of things. And they sent me a note the other day that said something to the effect of, you know, I wasn't sure about you, but now I actually trust you. And it was interesting. They said it much more eloquently and thoughtfully than that, but that was the basic message. And you know, it was interesting to me because here I am, you know, beating myself up a lot over what's happening and what we're not doing well and the problems that we have. And you know, and here is somebody that's on the team who has every right to be critical of the work I've done in the past and the work I'm doing now. But for them to send that note, I know it was not something that person would ever send sort of loosely. It really was true for them. And I think, you know, I've read a lot about crisis management over the last few weeks, much more than I had before. And one of the things they say is, you know, you sort of have to draw from the well of goodwill during these times. You know, and also, but there's also ways you can build it too. Your reaction can build that goodwill, can build trust, it can build loyalty. And you know, all I know is what I'm reading and seeing, and I see other great examples of companies doing really incredible things to build leadership and trust inside their organizations. And so, you know, we can only do the best we can, but I definitely have hope on the professional side that there are some real positives that can come out of the really horrific situation that a lot of people are in. The other thing I would just mention is on the personal side, I wouldn't leave that behind either. Courtney mentioned a bunch of things like make sure you stay, you know, your own mental health and make sure is in a good place, and make sure you're going to the gym and your own physical health. The other things I would mention is, you know, I've kind of made a list of things that I've wanted to do that I just haven't had time for. I've wanted to teach. I have four kids between the age of 10 and 2. And I wanted my older kids, or all my kids, I want them to learn how to code. And I just haven't had time, or I haven't made time. And now I've been able to make time. I have my son listening to this talk in the garage with me right now, and hopefully he learns something from that. Or he learns that, you know, I don't know what he learned, but hopefully he learned something positive from it. He's learning from Courtney, and he's learned from Nick. But you know, like there are things that we can do. You know, people are learning languages. People are reading. People are, you know, maybe they're getting in shape finally. Maybe they're finally like, it's hard for us. We're all eating more than we should be eating right now. But you know, maybe they're finally like hitting some of their diet goals. Like there's all sorts of personal things you can do and achieve now that are probably much easier to achieve now than they were before. So try to also identify those other types of goals and other types of areas where you can improve personally, not just professionally. And you know, maybe those are the wins that you get out of this whole thing. And those could be much more valuable than anything you gain professionally.
I love this idea of the balance. I think we sometimes forget that we're all human beings and that there are other goals and aspirations. And I kind of feel that this has put that into introspect. I think when you are working from home, you are in isolation, or you're not, whichever country you are, you are in the situation where you are by yourself and with your thoughts. I love the idea that you're learning and building the better you, because that better you is going to create a better business for the people or the products and the communities that you're serving. So if I was to ask you both, like, what would be the one action you think that if an entrepreneur or a founder or a team member or someone who runs a business here is listening to this, one thing they could do to improve their odds and roll this dice, what to be successful during this time, what would you tell them?
I think for me, well, it's hard to pick one thing, but I think for one thing, I would ask founders to really focus on their own psychology at this time and ask themselves what's working for them and what's not. and know that any answer, either positive or negative, is going to be magnified during this time period. So doubling down on what is working and then really making an effort to, perhaps modify the behaviors that aren't working. That's really going to reverberate across your team, across your customers, etc. So I think that inward focus is actually pretty critical right now.
Yeah, and I would say one of the most valuable things that you can do right now is to go help somebody else, which is sort of a funny thing to think about, but whenever I am consumed by my own issues and my own problems and the things I'm struggling with, the very best thing that I can do is to force myself at times to go help someone else. A couple weeks ago, we gave everyone in the company, I mean, we can't do a lot. I can't, so impressed by what Jack Dorsey did. I don't have the capacity to do that, but we gave everyone in the company $100 and asked them to go help somebody else that was affected by COVID-19. But the only way they could actually get it was they had to share that experience with the rest of the team. And these stories that people have, I mean, $100, like, depending on where you are in the world, that can be a lot of money, or not a lot of money, but it has had a huge impact on 30 or 40 people who are close with the people that we love inside of our company. And so this is something where the days where I felt most discouraged, I literally have had to sometimes force myself to get on my phone, put time in my calendar to do something for someone else, and I always feel better after that happens, and I always feel like things are going to get better faster after that happens. So think about the people around you. Try and get out of your own problems if you can, to just extend a hand. Somebody is struggling and suffering a lot worse than you, that's very close to you right now, and I have found that helping them through their problems often eliminates, or at the very least, helps my problems go away a lot faster.
That's awesome. I love that. I love the idea of kind of paying it forward and helping someone that's not you. I think that kind of comes around tenfold. And I think looking at the last question for you both, I mean, the world has really changed. And I think that even as the dust settles, the world will be operating in a slightly different way. And I think personally, I'm actually quite excited by that. I'm excited to see kind of what can come out of that. But the world will have different markets and different innovations coming from that. What are you excited about in terms of what could come out of this? Where I think, Derek, you mentioned obviously Uber and Airbnb and various things that came out of the last recession. What kind of things are you both excited by that could maybe come out of this period that we're in at the moment?
I think I'm particularly excited about online education right now. We've seen a lot of movement in the online education space. We have some great portfolio companies who are doing big things, but all of a sudden, I think there's just an acceleration and acceptance of the fact that we need really more online education, and perhaps should consider, how our education system has worked and how we can make it more available to people, within their own needs. And maybe that doesn't have to include a physical presence. So I'm particularly excited about that acceleration. And just also, I think the tech adoption in general. My 6-year-old asked me today, I mentioned that I was going to be having a meeting, and she said, "Oh, are you the host?" And now she knows, that there's a Zoom host. And my 2-year-old had a birthday party, and all the grandparents logged in successfully to Zoom. And I felt like that was actually—
That is wicked. I love that.
Yeah, so really just excited to see the overall acceleration in tech adoption, but also really excited to see what's going to happen in the education space.
Those are great thoughts. And I mean, Marc Andreessen has a great blog post about this. I recommend everybody go read it. It just came out yesterday, the day before. And he talks about that specifically, it's speaking specifically about America, and there's a lot of people that are not from America here, and I've lived outside the U.S. for 8 years of my life, so I think I generally have a more global perspective. I think this applies to anyone. But what he talked about is this really exposed a lot of the issues that America is having right now, and the we've put so many things out of our control, and we haven't innovated. We've just sort of just gone through the motions on everything from education to our healthcare system to our, I mean, just literally everything, our supply chain. We have just found somebody else to solve these problems, or we just used the same solutions we've had for decades. And, reading that, I just thought, I'm no expert on trends and things, that I just thought, wow, like there are going to be hundreds of incredible companies in all sorts of different industries, things that I don't know anything about, including my own in community and events. And like, there's going to be so many opportunities to help people in the new way that we see the world. And so, I'd say what every good investor has said before, which is find what you're passionate about, find what you want to spend 50, 60, 70 hours a week on for the next few years, and go find an innovation in that space and make it happen, and work like crazy to do it. And if you can survive professionally through this, when we emerge from it, there'll be no better time to start something. I started Startup Grind quit my job in 2009 and started Startup Grind in 2010. And, in the midst, and I remember I had all the optimism coming out of this job, and I had all the excitement, and there were so many people that had not been able to survive. And I was fortunate to be right at that moment in that time and space, and it created opportunities for me. And if you're new in your career, that same thing is possible for you. And if you're older in your entrepreneurial career, I'm 10 years in, the same thing is possible for us. We've got to survive. But we've got to this is the time probably work the hardest you've ever worked in your life. And I think I am. And I encourage you to do the same. But as Courtney eloquently said, this will end at some point. And, just make sure you're in a place where you can capitalize on that and run with whatever you're passionate about.
This has been wonderful. Honestly, we're so grateful, Derek and Courtney, for the time that you've shared. And honestly, there's been so many great pieces of advice that I hope people have taken. Now, very finally, would love to just hear your final parting thought around, obviously, I know it's 10 years for you, Derek, with Startup Grind, and Courtney, 500 has been around and been a very big part of even me building a startup as well. So would love to hear the last final thought you have from each of your companies, whether that be advice or how you're working through this, that you'd like to share with obviously our wonderful audience here today.
Courtney, I'll go quick. We'll give you the last word. I would just don't be paralyzed by fear, and get out there and get some rest and get some exercise, and then go make it happen. But don't be paralyzed by the things you can't control. Don't be paralyzed by the mistakes that you're bound to make, and we're all making on an hourly basis through this thing. But just get out there and do the best you can do. Work really hard. Be a cockroach. Figure out how to survive, and potentially thrive. There are people thriving in this environment. I want to be one of those people. I am striving to be one of those people that is thriving through this, and I'm trying to navigate how to become one of those people. And I think you can too. And so I just encourage you to not give up, and this too shall pass.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as I said, definitely taking care of yourself, super important right now. Checking in with people on a really human level, to see, how they're doing and how you can support one another. But as Derek said, I mean, this is really a time to earn your stripes. We're all, going to go through ups and downs in our life. This is unique because we're all going through this together. which is in and of itself, I think, a big opportunity for change, a catalyst for change. So just encouraging people to know you've made it this far, you can keep going, and don't be afraid to reach out to advisors, to investors, to your friends, to other founders, really get that outside perspective. It's really important right now, but at the end of the day, just keeping focused. We will get through this, and we're excited. I'm so happy that there are so many founders in the world who are willing to take their time, to take the risk, really build great things. So I hope to see that continue to grow during this.
In your words, Courtney, our audience has made it this far, and we have almost 30 seconds left. So thank you sincerely from those of you that have joined us from around the world. I know that we've had friends in Asia, in London. Thank you for not throttling my bandwidth with Netflix, which is brilliant. And thank you everyone just for obviously sharing these thoughts. And a sincere thanks again to Derek and to Courtney. You've been absolutely wonderful. I feel like I've taken away so many learnings. We will be sharing a recording of this by email. So for those of you who have got friends, loved ones, anyone who's basically within this, I feel like there's so much goodness that's come out of that. Please do share this with your teams, and really take some of this. And we really hope you thrive as part of this. So thank you, everyone. Thank you both, and have a healthy, safe, and wonderful week ahead. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.